Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey, and today I have with me.
Terry Dussault from Yellowknife Consulting Services.
Maybe you could explain what Yellowknife Consulting Services is, and with I know it's about California and safety, but you know a lot more than that.
Yeah. So what it is, we try and help employers who, have to comply with different types of OSHA standards or safety standards for, any type of industry. A lot of times it's general industry, aerospace, construction is really a big focal point. And I have a lot of clients in the environmental field as well.
And construction is what we concentrate on. That's what we report on day in and day out. So I'd like to start with you sent us a list of things, topics that you talk about. A lot of it is hazards in the workplace, specifically construction. So maybe we could go into there's respiratory hazards. There's a lot of struck by hazards that are happening, increasingly so. And there's also biological hazards. So maybe you could sort those out for us, what those are and how they can be prevented.
Yeah, so let's just go ahead and start off with respiratory hazards because in construction, there's a wide range of different types of respiratory hazards. And some of the things that I see a lot, I do a lot of site inspections. So
Mhm.
the thing that really comes up the most is silica dust when people are doing, grinding or saw cutting and that type of stuff. Or sometimes they're even doing some finishing work on concrete walls and they have to sand them down before they put coatings on. And
Mhm.
so with respiratory hazards, one of the things I just wrote a blog about this is the powered air purifying respirators
Mhm.
and how beneficial they are compared to regular respirator masks, like the half mask and the full face mask, and they provide like a high level of comfort. And it really what it does is it creates a bubble
Mhm.
that the worker can work in, and they're super efficient and comfortable. So I've been pushing those a lot with some of my clients, especially the environmental ones, because
Mhm.
a lot of people tend to use the regular respirators, and you know these pappers they call them are
Mhm.
so much better. So
Have you found, you said silica, I hear asbestos continues to be a real problem, partly because Canada sold it for a long time. That might be have something to do
yeah,
with it. But
uh,
but is that as big a problem in California, or has that been, I mean, it's always continuously a problem because it sticks in the lungs forever. But have you found sort of a change in what the hazard presence, I guess, is of asbestos versus silica?
I think it's pretty equal. We have a lot of asbestos projects and things that are going on over here as well, and it's very asbestos is prevalent worldwide. So
Hmm.
the hazard is always there, especially during demolition projects and things like that. So yeah, the that powered air purifying respirator is perfect for that as well. So
Now,
yeah.
you also pointed out biological hazards. Now, I can think of one that we all went through the pandemic, but where we had to radically change how we did a lot of work on construction sites, and most of the people did pretty quickly. Have you found that helped in a way for people adapting to new biological stuff? And what are some of these biological threats?
Yeah, so one of the things that I see a lot here is biological hazards that some of them get overlooked, on construction sites. And I write a lot of safety plans for companies that are going out doing different types of projects. And one of the things that comes up a lot that creates a lot of problems is poisonous plants.
Mm.
So we have a lot of poison oak and poison ivy here. So sometimes projects start off with clearing and grubbing of vegetation and things like that, and the employers will send people out to go do this kind of work, and sometimes they're not really thinking about how bad that hazard is, because
Hmm.
if you get an exposure, sometimes I've seen people where they're out of work for 2 months dealing with a exposure because they had a systemic exposure to, let's say, poison oak. And then, so what happens there is, once you get a severe exposure, it takes a while for it to go away,
Hmm.
and it's painful. A lot of guys I know. We had one guy. He got it. It took 30 days
Hmm.
for the blisters on his arms and everything, his body to go away. And the company kind of like sidelined him until he was better. And so when he finally returned to work, the guy basically goes back and puts his gloves on, the same gloves he was using when
Oops.
he got the exposure, and he got secondary exposure.
Hmm.
And he was out for almost the same amount of time with the secondary exposure. So that's pretty nasty biohazard. And one of the clients I have does a lot of encampment cleanups here in Los Angeles.
Hmm.
And so the homeless encampments, there's a lot of biohazards there with human waste. There's needles sometimes that they find, and those types of biohazards. And some of the other ones that commonly get overlooked, the severity level is flying insects or stinging insects, spiders,
Hmm.
and things like that. So yeah, there's a wide range of them, to think about.
Now, California, probably more than us in BC here, we've experienced our share of wildfires. You have certainly experienced your share of wildfires and heat, as we did too. What is some new stuff that's, or is it just the tried and true to deal with that because it is getting worse on both fronts?
Yeah, I think for here, like OSHA's really cracked down a lot on heat illness prevention, and I
Hmm.
think they've had some workers here in California that do in the farming community, and I think one was a young gal who was picking fruit, and she died from heat stroke.
Hmm.
And so these things, they come up a lot, and OSHA is tired of it, because uh, it's just one of those things that it's at the forefront of a lot of employers' minds when they're sending workers out to do jobs and things like that. But it just seems like it's always happening.
Hmm.
And oddly, we for one company that I did some work for, we did like a pretty serious campaign around heat illness prevention, and we brought in all the superintendents and the foremen, and we tried to emphasize to them like the importance of really monitoring your crews.
Hmm.
And even after that, that effort, like the like the next week, they had a heat exposure incident, and one
Hmm.
of them involved a foreman.
Hmm. Oh, okay. Who
So
had been at your meeting? Yeah.
yeah, so it begs the question, why does this keep happening?
Hmm.
Even though you're training people, and even though you're providing them shade, you're making sure they have the water on site, electrolytes, and I think the bottom line is that people just tend to underestimate it, and then next thing you know, like, they're already uh, slightly maybe dehydrated before they even get to
Hmm.
work, and then they're not hydrated enough, and within a short amount of time either the humidity gets them, or so those are things that they pop up a lot, even though you do the training
Hmm.
and you're doing site inspections to make sure that they have all everything they need. It still occurs. So that's a hot button definitely for OSHA. And then as far as the wildfire here in California, a lot of employers there's a wildfire smoke prevention policy
Mm.
that is required for employers, so that at a certain level, they'll pull workers, and they basically say, you got to go home because
Hmm.
the air quality index is not aligning right. It's too high. So, but they've put a lot of focus on that because of the fire. Yeah.
Hmm. Another thing you pointed out was the rise in struck by incidents with forklifts and other heavy equipment. Maybe you could explain why that's happening.
Yeah, I think struck by incidents is something that's kind of always there. When I write safety plans, especially when there's a lot of heavy equipment that's going to be on sites, like the forklifts, the reach lifts, uh, loaders, any heavy equipment, there's a lot of opportunity for something to happen if workers are just not paying attention.
Hmm.
And sometimes these incidents where you see the spikes or a lot of, we'll say a lot of cases, is when you have simultaneous operations, you have multiple contractors out on a job. And I remember about 4 or 5 months ago, I was out doing a site inspection, and a operator of a reach lift was pretty razor focused on what was in front of him. He was about to lift a heavy concrete vault, and there was another operation that was happening 5 feet behind his reach lift, which was concrete saw cutting. And the thing when I was observing this situation, the thing that was surprising to me was that the operator had no presence of mind or didn't even look back to see, what was behind him. And there was 3 or 4 workers around the concrete saw, and those workers were not even they never made contact with the operator. They didn't like walk up and communicate with him and say, "Hey, look, man, we're working just behind you here."
Hmm.
So there, when I see that, I intervene immediately because that's a recipe for something to happen, a struck by
Hmm.
incident. And sometimes it takes an outsider or somebody to just look at that, and you can. A lot of times you can feel it
Hmm.
when it's going to happen.
Right.
And I got the sense this was not a good situation. And so, that's why it's so important where, for workers to really, if they see something, intervene and
Hmm.
say something. And a lot of workers, they don't really understand the importance of that or the power that they have just by speaking up and making it known, like, hey, look, we're working over here, is this okay, or
Hmm.
should we stop work for a bit, and then when you're done with your lift, we'll resume. The reason that people don't speak up sometimes is because they don't have the confidence to do it.
Hmm.
They think that that's somebody else's job. And I always encourage people, if you see something that doesn't look right, definitely speak up, because sometimes you could have a lot of crew out there and everybody's so focused on the work that they're doing, they're not looking at the big picture. And I saw a guy one time, I went to go investigate an accident
Hmm.
at a work site that involved a piece of equipment. It was a mini excavator, and the crew was basically wrapping it up, and they were going to go home for the day because the site superintendent said we're shutting it down because the incident was kind of severe. In the process of shutting things down, there was an operator of a skid steer, and he was maneuvering this thing around, and he had the thing in a very small work area, and he had the RPMs on it pretty high, too high. And there was some other workers within close proximity, but one particular worker happened to crouch down, and he had his back turned to the machine. The operator couldn't see him.
Hmm.
And those machines move so fast that it really, like, immediately I kind of intervened, and I told the guy, "Hey, you need to come over here and get out of the way. This guy
Hmm.
can't see you." So I did a stop work, and I talked to all of them, and I said, "You guys just had an incident, 2 hours ago. You're When you are not paying attention to what's happening all around you, and you're underestimating the speed of this equipment and how fast it can be on you, and the next thing now you have a struck by."
Hmm.
So uh, I always tell people your body is just a bag of water,
Hmm.
and if you get struck by a piece of heavy equipment, yeah, that's not a good scenario. Even a skid steer or a mini X or something like that. Yeah.
Now, worker awareness obviously paramount, but there's also a push by OSHA to certify forklift operators, and there's a more intense certification. Maybe you could go into details on that.
Yeah, for sure. So I like doing forklift training.
Hmm.
I'm an operator. I'm a trainer. So I've spent a lot of time on a forklift, more time than I would really want to admit. But uh, one of the things, with the training is, um, a lot of times people get the training, but they just don't have uh, the hours, like the
Hmm.
experience. So it's very easy for things to go south. And I kind of like tell people, if you go get your driver's license today and you're a 18-year-old kid, that doesn't mean you can get in your car and drive cross country and expect to get there safely,
Hmm.
because you have to build the skill level. And interestingly, with the forklifts, there's a lot of different types. And where I see a lot of issue, which was really surprising to me, but I managed I did the safety oversight for a pretty big project in Los Angeles a few
Hmm.
years back. And there was over 100 workers. We had 25 equipment operators, and they were running reach lifts every day. And one of the things that I realized is, uh, you have to have really good depth perception when you're using a reach lift, because that boom goes out pretty far.
Hmm.
And the way I realized that sometimes there's an issue with that is because we started seeing a real spike in incidents
Hmm.
where the equipment it was property damage at first, and then there was some bodily injury incidents. And once we started to investigate them, we realized that we got to not only make sure that the workers or the operators are trained on the equipment, but we have to spend the time to vet them out and make sure that they really know how to operate it safely. And sometimes, like with the unions and things we have over here, you can call the union up and get a union operator,
Hmm.
and you think you're getting somebody that's got a lot of time like seat time on the machine. And that's not always the case.
Hmm.
They might have run a equipment like a loader or an excavator and have a lot of hours on that. And you think a forklift or a reach lift or something like that would be a slam dunk, but sometimes that's not the case.
Hmm. Well, you know
So
better than I would. Yeah.
yeah, so doing what I call practical evaluations. So you have the classroom side that OSHA, they expect you
Hmm.
to pass a test, but the practical side, watching and observing and making sure that there's documentation for how that operator operated the machine. You know, that's a big part of the requirement as well, and it's a good way for employers to protect themselves, because a lot of times they don't take it to that length, and you have to do it. So they're just like, probably in the last 3 or 4 months there was two fatalities involving forklifts down here in the port of Los Angeles, and then
Hmm.
another one was in Los Angeles. But uh, yeah, those were big forklifts, and one of them toppled over on a hillside, and the operator wasn't wearing a seatbelt.
Mm.
And the other one that was in the port, I don't know exactly how that one happened, but I think they were trying to lift the machine, and the operator was sitting in it,
Mm.
and somehow it rolled over and he fell out, got crushed. So yeah, they put a lot of emphasis around the regulation on forklifts, because that's another thing where OSHA sees a lot of fatalities. And as much as they push these different campaigns to be safe, it just it's always popping up. So
Mhm.
it's yeah.
One of the things you sent to us beforehand is five essential steps that supervisors can have to sort of ensure safety, or to the extent that they can. So, what are those five steps, and how do they go about implementing them?
Oh, so well, it could be there's a lot of different steps, I guess. But if I had to pick five, one would be, making sure that they start their morning with a tailgate safety meeting where they
Hmm.
discuss the scope of work, what the hazards are, and how they're going to mitigate those hazards. Um, Number two is leading by example and making sure that if you are the supervisor, that you're not shortcutting procedures,
Hmm.
and because that sends a message that it's okay to do that. So sometimes there's some supervisors that are out on job sites. They're like cowboys and they want to get the job done. But
Hmm.
when you have a crew of people and you're responsible for them, if they see you shortcutting, you're basically saying it's okay. So
Hmm.
that's one of the things that could be, that should be at the forefront. Lead by example.
Hmm.
The other thing is the timely reporting of incidents when they happen, so that there's the best outcome for not only the employer but for the employee. Because sometimes, you know, uh, injuries or incidents happen and they don't get reported upline quick enough. So that's something that is probably high priority, I would say. Uh, and the other thing is just making sure that your crew is really synced up and that it's harmonious.
Hmm.
And I don't believe in ruling with a heavy hand on a job site and pointing fingers and doing a lot of fault finding and yelling and screaming. You're not going to get very far with that.
Hmm.
And what you do is you'll start to create animosity and you have people on edge. And if
Which means
people
it's
are,
less safe. Yeah.
yes, yes. And people I've seen where, there's some leaders or supervisors that are out on the job and, they get rattled for different reasons. And maybe it's budget, maybe it's something else, something at home. And they start to like try and crack down, or they're just not nice.
Hmm.
And it really can have a huge impact on safety and morale. And I've seen where, some supervisors that are on jobs, they're really pushing production. And I like this one job I was at, I know the company very well, and I know the owners of the
Hmm.
company, and I know that they would not want to see this, but I saw workers running across the site
Hmm.
because they were trying to get the job done. And I remember this particular site had a lot of rocks. It was in an area they just had tons of river rock, and one of the
Hmm.
workers was running across the job site with a sawzall in his hand. And when I went to the foreman, one of the foremen, I said, "Why are these guys running?
Hmm.
What what is so important that they have to be running across the job? Because that isn't going to fly, you
Hmm.
know." And so I kind of nipped it, but what I realized, it was a new superintendent that had been hired that came from somewhere else. Their culture was different.
Hmm. Hmm.
So their culture was push, 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 and it's about production. And it took a while to like recalibrate this guy a little bit and tell him that's not how it's going to work here.
Hmm.
Because if you do that, it will turn into an incident. And sometimes what I always say is, working slower is working faster. Because when you have an incident, it'll stop the whole job. It could shut it down for, a few days. It could shut it down for a couple weeks. The cost involved, So sometimes, uh, I think leadership is so important out on the
Hmm.
job, making sure things are safe. So
If people are looking to see what you do in Yellowknife Consulting Services, or just want resources on safety on the job site, where would be a good place for them to start?
yeah, so my website is called, it's www.yellowknifesafety.com.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of stuff you can see on the website. I provide a lot of program documents for people. If they just need advice because they're not sure, what to do, they can call me and I can, walk them through some different ideas, because everybody has different challenges. When it comes to safety, there's so much, depth to it. And so sometimes people just don't know.
Hmm.
They need advice on training. They need advice on what to do if there's an incident. And I've done hundreds of incident investigations. So yeah, I'm always willing to talk to somebody. So they can pick up the phone and just call. My website is got my number on there, so I'm
Okay,
I'm
great.
easy to track down. Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us today, Terry.
Yeah. Hey, thanks a lot, Warren. Appreciate the time.
Thanks for listening to the Construction Record Podcast. You can hear us on Apple Music, Amazon, and Spotify, as well as at theconstructionrecord.libsyn.com and on the Daily Commercial News and Journal of Commerce websites. Thanks again for listening.